Hey folks, Roland Martin here. Well, welcome to my YouTube channel. You know, over the years, I go to a lot of different seminars, and I go to boat shows, and I go to all these store openings for Bass Pro, and people are always asking me things about like the early tournament wins, for example. One of the things that have come up recently is they talk about, well, how do I get started? How do I get into this whole big tournament deal? And I'll tell them about my first tournament win, like it was on Lake Seminole, and it was 1970, and it was because we didn't have a lot of rules then. You know, the thing about tournament fishing now, compared to what it was in 1970, is that it was a complete lack of rules, you might say. It was about anything would go. And some of the things that I did to win that tournament, you can't even think about doing right now. I mean, it's just like, you can't get the information that we had. You can't pre-fish all these days that I did for that particular tournament. You can't, just 100 different things. And that's how I won the tournament. But it was completely legal then, because Ray Scott and the Bass Angler Sportsman Society didn't really have any rules much in the whole tournament circuit. Well, how I won the first tournament, let me just kind of talk about it. It was the second tournament that I ever fished. The first tournament was on Toledo Bend, and I went there early, just like I was talking about. We didn't have a rule for pre-fishing, and so I was guiding at Santee Cooper right off the bat in 1970, and I had a couple of weeks free, and so I went down to Toledo Bend on the first tournament and just practiced for a couple of weeks, and I came in second place. Well, then the second tournament came along, and that was Lake Seminole on the Georgia-Florida border. And I said, well, heck, I did so good the last tournament. Maybe I can just go for like a whole month. And so I just went there and I met old Jack Wingate. He has the Lunker Lodge there at Bainbridge, Georgia. He's just a prince of a guy. Hard-working guy. He'd get up every morning and he would do a radio show, two different radio things, like it's almost like a, I guess you'd call it the tips of the day and a daily report, daily fishing report kind of a thing. That's what it was. Out of Dothan, Georgia, and he had it syndicated out of a couple places. But it was basically just information on the daily fishing of the lake. And so I'd get in there early in the morning and before the tournament ever started, and Jack would sit down with me at the radio microphone. He'd say, "Oh, okay, tell everybody what you were doing, what's going on out there." And I'd tell them I'd caught a few fish on a spinnerbait. I'd tell them I'd caught a few fish over here or somewhere else. And then Jack would tell me, okay, well, here's what you got to do. Why don't you go up and check that creek out, and then check this other creek out. Well, so he was helping me out a lot just because I'd give him a good fishing report for the next morning. Well, after a whole month of fishing, I knew the lake pretty well because I'd been out there every single day. And there was an old guy that worked there at the bait shop for Jack Wingate named Mr. Mixon. And Mr. Mixon, he was in his 80s at the time, an old guy, and he said, "Have you tried the Beaver dams up in these little creeks way in the back of nowhere?" And I said, "No, I haven't tried them. What's the deal on the Beaver dam?" He says, "If you can get over the Beaver dams and get your boat into some of these little back ponds, nobody will ever get in there and you'll have virgin fish." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." So we didn't have jet boats then, we didn't have airboats then, and we didn't have a lot of boats then. And I had a little bomber. It was before I had my Ranger boat. I had a little bomber boat with an 80 on it. It was pretty light. I could push it over stuff. So we didn't have rules now. So I'd come up to the Beaver Dam that Mr. Mixon would tell me about, and sure enough, it was a couple inches high. I'd get out in the water and I'd push it and I'd shove it and I'd start the engine and I'd do this, and finally I'd wiggle the boat in there, get it in the Beaver Dam, in the lake. Now that boat was about 1/5 of the weight of this thing. This thing it would be absolutely impossible to get a big boat like this one. It was a great bass boat, don't get me wrong, but you could never get it over a Beaver Dam. Not like we did back 50 years ago. So anyway, I'd get the boat back at the Beaver Dam, and I had a lure called a Diamond Jim Rattler. And what the Diamond Jim Rattler was it was a top water bait with propellers on each end. It was a big, big lure. And Jim Strader had come down to Santee Cooper on a couple occasions for a couple of years before. And we'd made a deal. It was my first deal as a fisherman. I told Jim, I said, listen, I'm going to be fishing some B.A.S.S tournaments for the first time, and I need some money and some help, and can you be my sponsor? So Jim Strader was my first sponsor. He had given me like $50 a month. It wasn't very much, but it was a sponsorship. And so I took that plug, and I have the pictures on the package of the plug now. I'd like to show you, but we didn't have catch and release then. We kept all the fish, and Scott would donate them to charity. He'd donate them to the children's fund or whoever he'd donate them to, and so the kind of the way it went was that back then, when we had a tournament, you didn't throw fish back because there were always hungry people, and people get mad. What'd you throw the fish back for? There's hungry people over here that need the fish. You could have given them those fish. Well, why are you being so wasteful and throwing the fish back in the water when they could be eating them? You know, so that's the thought of in 1970 was it always keep the fish because somebody would want to eat them. Well, that was the thought process before catch and release, and certainly that's the secret of today's successful fishing, particularly on places like headwaters. It's all catch and release. You can't keep a single fish, and because of that, we're catching a lot of fish. But anyway, back then we didn't think about that. We just had big stringers of fish and would give them away all the time. So anyway, Mr. Mixon told me about these ponds. The tournament started. I took that little bomber bass boat. I zoomed it up these little shallow creeks and pushed it in, got out of the boat, pushed and shoved it over the Beaver Dam, all these kind of terrible things. Got in there and won the tournament. Actually won the tournament. And I took that Diamond Jim Strader plug and worked it around. I could see the spawning beds. Back then I had polarized glasses, believe it or not. Not this particular kind, but I could stand up high, and I stand up on an ice chest. That's the second thing that you can't do. You can't stand on an ice chest. You can't push your boat into the place, and you can't stand up on an ice chest, and you can't talk to guys like Mr. Mixon and Jack Wingate about all the fishing that's going on for a whole month. So that's just three things right there. Well, anyway, I won the tournament, and we used to have banquets then. At the night of the win, we'd have a big banquet. We'd sit down to a meal, and we'd give away the prize money. We'd give away the trophies. And that's how we did it back in 1970. Well, it was my turn to get up. He said, okay, the champion of the Lake Seminole tournament. Ray Scott introduces me to Roland Martin, a guide at Santee Cooper. And he says, Roland, what do you attribute your win to? What's the big secret? And I said, well, golly, Jack. I was talking to Ray Scott. Golly, Mr. Scott, the biggest deal was the fact that I came here a month ago and fished every day, and I know every little nook and cranny of the lake. He says, oh, maybe we ought to change that rule. That was the first Roland rule that they changed, was the fact that you couldn't just practice for a whole month. You had to have like a 3-day warm-up or a 3-day practice period, and that would be all you get. As tournaments progressed, there were other Roland rules that came into being. For example, that ice chest thing that I stood on, I ended up, like in saltwater, when you're down in the Florida Keys, you have a poling platform in the back of the boat where you stand up high and the guy's poling the boat, and then up front you have a casting platform which is another couple feet high, and the angler's sitting up there and he's looking out in the water. So now you can see with polarized glasses, you can see that tarpon, you can see that bonefish, you can see that barracuda. You can see all these different kinds of fish because you're high. Well, that's another rule that when I showed up years later at Lake Okeechobee, I built a poling platform on my boat, and of course I won the tournament, and then that was a Roland rule. Then I went up to, took the bass boat. I took a small little boat, a little Ranger aluminum boat. I had a jet drive on it. I went way up the Connecticut River on another tournament where you're not really supposed to be with a jet boat. They made that a Roland rule, no more jet boats. So there's 5 or 6 different rules that we call Roland rules, because I was on the brink of propriety. In other words, I was doing the legal thing. I was doing everything I could to take advantage of the laws and rules. For example, if it only had 3 days of warm-ups, I'd have the 3 days of warm-up, but I'd get out there the first one in the morning, I'd be the last one to come off on the evening in the lake. So my son Scott had told me, he says, Dad, you're the Cal Ripken of the tournament trail. You just do all these crazy things, getting up early and staying out late, you got a lot of energy. And I do. I have a lot of energy. Here I am in my 80s now, and I got up at 4 o'clock this morning. Well, yesterday I had a full day. I fished 15 hours, did a big film from dawn to dark. And that's kind of the way I operate. But I think it's good as a healthy thing. If you get up early and fish hard all day, that's good health. And you're doing a lot of things and you're staying active. And so that's kind of the secret of my success. But that first tournament win was so special because we didn't have the rules that we have now today, and yet I was legal. I was legal in every way, and it was so rewarding. To think about the fact that I'd take a boat, in this boat, for example, and try to push it back into a beaver pond. There would be zero way of doing that. Now I've looked at the lake, Seminole, back now years and years later. Those beaver dam places don't exist. They've all grown in with bulrushes, and you can't even get in there even with an airboat. So it's not any kind of open water situation anymore like we had back early on. So anyway, that was my first tournament win, and it was a great successful time, and it kind of started me off on the tournament trail because that first tournament was at Toledo Bend. I came in second. The second tournament I won there at Lake Seminole, and then the third tournament I went to Lake Eufaula as my third tournament. And again, I practiced for a whole month. They hadn't changed the rules. And again, I came in second. But after that third tournament, Scott said, Roland's doing too good. He's practicing for a whole month at a time. I didn't have anything else to do but fish every single day. We're going to have to change some rules. And so that's where the rules changes came from. Well, folks, thanks for watching, and I know I told you a few little stories and anecdotes about what yesterday brought, what yesteryears, and it was certainly a nice little walk down memory lane. So we'll see you again soon. Hey, thanks for watching. Hey, hit that likes button. Thank you. We'll see you again soon.